Maya Williams, the new girl at Clearview High. Have you ever felt like a stranger in a place where everyone else seemed to belong? That's exactly how Maya Williams felt as she stepped off the school bus and into the bustling world of Clearview High School in Houston, Texas. But Maya wasn't just any new student. She carried with her the weight of countless transfers, the burden of always being the outsider, and a determination to stay invisible. Little did she know, this new school would soon become the stage for a confrontation that would change everything. Maya tightened her grip on her backpack straps as she stood outside the towering brick building. The air was crisp with the faint scent of freshly cut grass, mingling with the distant hum of morning traffic. Around her, students moved in clusters, laughing, shouting, and greeting friends they hadn't seen since yesterday. Maya felt like an intruder in their world, a world that had already been built and fortified long before she arrived. This wasn't her first time being the new girl. In fact, it was her fourth school transfer in 3 years. Each move had its reasons, some practical, some deeply personal. But for Maya, every transfer meant starting over. It meant learning new hallways, new faces, and new rules. Most importantly, it meant figuring out how to blend in without drawing attention to herself. As she walked toward the entrance, her head bowed slightly to avoid eye contact. She could feel the occasional glance from curious students. Who was this girl? Where did she come from? Maya knew those questions would swirl around for a few days before fading into indifference. That's how it always went. People were curious about new faces at first, but high school hierarchies were rigid. Newcomers rarely disrupted them. Clearview High wasn't much different from any other suburban school Maya had attended. It had its cliques, the athletes who dominated Friday nights on the football field, the cheerleaders who ruled Instagram with perfectly curated posts, the band kids who stuck together like family, and everyone else who fell somewhere in between. Maya didn't care about any of it. Her goal was simple: survive high school by staying under the radar. As she stepped inside the building, the chaos of a typical morning engulfed her. Lockers slammed shut as students hurried to grab their books before class. The squeak of sneakers echoed against polished tile floors. Teachers shouted instructions over the noise, trying to corral their students into classrooms before the bell rang. Maya clutched her schedule tightly and navigated through the crowd like a shadow. She had perfected this routine over the years: find her locker quickly, memorize her class schedule, figure out where to sit during lunch without attracting attention, and most importantly, identify who to avoid. It didn't take long for Maya to notice him. Bryce Carter. Even if someone didn't know Bryce's name, they knew his presence. He was tall and broad-shouldered with an aura of confidence that seemed almost tangible. Bryce wasn't just popular, he was powerful. He didn't need to say much to command attention. His smirk alone could silence a room or spark laughter from his entourage of Letterman jacket-clad jocks. Bryce leaned casually against a row of lockers near the center of the hallway, surrounded by his usual group of friends. They laughed loudly at something he'd said, a joke or comment that probably wasn't funny but was treated like gold simply because it came from him. Maya recognized his type immediately: star quarterback with good looks and a wealthy family background. He was the kind of guy who thrived on control, the kind who made people either want to follow him or fear him. Maya didn't plan on crossing paths with Bryce Carter. She didn't plan on crossing paths with anyone if she could help it. But fate had other ideas. As Maya walked past Bryce's group on her way to her locker, she felt it, the deliberate bump against her shoulder that sent her books tumbling to the floor. It wasn't an accident, it was calculated. A few students nearby turned their heads to watch. Some snickered quietly at her misfortune. Maya bent down quickly to pick up her books without saying a word or looking up. She'd been through this before. These moments where someone tried to test her patience or provoke a reaction. She knew better than to give them what they wanted. Well, what do we have here? The voice above her was calm, but laced with mockery. Maya froze for a moment before looking up slowly. Bryce Carter stood over her with his arms crossed, and that infuriating smirk plastered across his face. The same smirk she'd seen on every bully who thought they ruled their little kingdom. "I don't think I've seen you here before," Bryce said smoothly. "You knew?" Maya didn't respond immediately. She simply picked up her books and stood up without saying a word. But Bryce wasn't done. "Hey, where are your manners?" he called out loudly enough for everyone nearby to hear. "I asked you a question." Maya kept walking without looking back. She knew this game all too well. The best way to deal with people like Bryce was not to engage. But Bryce didn't like being ignored. A sharp tug on her backpack stopped her in her tracks. Not enough to hurt, but enough to send a clear message. I'm not letting this go. Maya turned around slowly and met Bryce's gaze head-on. For a moment, the hallway seemed to go silent, as even those who hadn't been paying attention started watching. You shouldn't have done that, Maya said softly but firmly. Bryce raised an eyebrow before letting out a slow, mocking laugh. Oh yeah? And why is that? Maya didn't answer right away. She simply held his gaze steadily without flinching. Bryce tilted his head slightly and chuckled again, a sound filled with amusement but tinged with frustration at her lack of fear or reaction. You're kind of weird, you know that? His friends laughed behind him as if on cue, but Maya turned away once more and walked off without another word. She knew this wasn't over, not by a long shot, but what Bryce didn't know was that he'd just made the biggest mistake of his life. For now, though, Maya focused on blending in as much as possible for the rest of the day. She found her classes easily enough and avoided drawing attention during lectures or group activities. At lunch, she chose an empty table near the edge of the cafeteria where she could eat alone in peace, or so she thought. From across the room, Bryce sat surrounded by his entourage at their usual table in the center of the cafeteria, the heart of social power at Clearview High, and occasionally glanced toward Maya's corner with an expression that hinted at curiosity mixed with annoyance. Maya ignored him as best as she could while silently preparing herself for whatever might come next. Bryce Carter, the bully who chose the wrong target. Bryce Carter had always been the king of Clearview High. His name carried weight in every hallway. His presence commanded attention in every room, and his smirk alone was enough to send shivers down the spines of anyone who dared to cross him. He wasn't just a bully. He was a force of nature, and he knew it. For Bryce, power wasn't just something he held. It was something he wielded, like a weapon, to keep everyone in line. And when Maya Williams walked into his school, quiet and unassuming, he saw her as just another easy target. To Bryce, Maya was an outsider, a nobody. She didn't walk with confidence, didn't have a group of friends surrounding her, and didn't even try to blend into the social fabric of the school. She kept her head down, avoided eye contact, and seemed almost invisible. But to Bryce, that made her the perfect prey. He thrived on finding people like Maya, those who wouldn't fight back, those who wouldn't challenge him. It wasn't about hatred or malice for Bryce. It was about control. He loved the feeling of power that came from making others feel small. Bryce's reign at Clearview High had gone unchallenged for years. As the star quarterback of the football team, he was untouchable. Teachers overlooked his behavior because they needed him on the field. His peers either admired him or feared him, sometimes both. Even other bullies deferred to Bryce because they knew better than to compete with him for dominance. Bryce wasn't just popular. He was invincible, or so he thought. When he first noticed Maya in the hallway that morning, something about her caught his attention. Maybe it was the way she moved, quietly, deliberately, as if she were trying not to be seen. Maybe it was the way she avoided looking at anyone directly, as though she were afraid of drawing attention to herself. Or maybe it was simply because she was new, and new faces always intrigued Bryce. Whatever the reason, he decided then and there that Maya would be his next target. It started small, an intentional bump in the hallway to knock her books out of her hands. He expected her to react like most people did, flustered, embarrassed, maybe even angry. But Maya didn't give him the reaction he wanted. She simply picked up her books and walked away without saying a word. That should have been the end of it. But for Bryce, it wasn't. Her lack of response irritated him more than he cared to admit. It wasn't just that she ignored him. It was how calm she seemed, how unaffected she appeared by his presence. Most people couldn't hide their fear or discomfort around Bryce. It fueled his ego to see them squirm under his gaze. But Maya? She didn't flinch. Bryce couldn't let that go. Over the next few days, he made it his mission to break her composure. He cornered her at her locker with sarcastic remarks about how friendly she seemed for a new student. He spread rumors about her being stuck up because she didn't talk to anyone. He even went out of his way to sit near her during lunch one day, loudly joking with his friends about how weird she was for sitting alone. But no matter what he did, Maya never reacted the way he expected. She didn't argue back when he insulted her. She didn't cry when he embarrassed her in front of others. She didn't even look angry when he pushed her buttons deliberately. Instead, she remained calm, almost unnervingly so, and continued going about her day as if Bryce Carter didn't exist. This only made Bryce more determined. For someone like Bryce, control was everything. He needed people to fear him because fear equaled respect in his mind. And yet here was this quiet girl who refused to play by his rules, who refused to acknowledge his power over her. It wasn't just frustrating, it was infuriating. Bryce began escalating his tactics. One afternoon during gym class, he accidentally threw a football too hard in Maya's direction, hitting her shoulder as she stood on the sidelines waiting for her turn. When the coach asked what happened, Bryce shrugged innocently and said it slipped from his hand, a lie everyone knew but no one dared question. Another time during a group project in history class, Bryce made snide comments about Maya's contributions loud enough for everyone else at the table to hear. "Wow, you're really pulling your weight here," he sneered sarcastically when she offered an idea for their presentation. Still, Maya didn't react. Her silence only fueled Bryce's obsession with breaking her resolve. What Bryce didn't realize, what no one realized, was that Maya wasn't ignoring him out of fear or weakness. She was watching him carefully, studying his behavior like a chess player analyzing their opponent's moves. She knew exactly what kind of person Bryce Carter was, someone who thrived on attention and craved validation through intimidation. Maya had dealt with bullies before, not just at school but in life, and she'd learned that fighting back directly only gave them what they wanted, a reaction. Instead of engaging with Bryce on his terms, Maya chose a different strategy, patience. She let him think he was winning while quietly preparing herself for what would come next. Bryce couldn't see it yet. He couldn't see how close he was to losing everything. But Maya could feel it building beneath the surface like a storm waiting to break. For now, though, Bryce still believed he held all the power. He strutted through Clearview High like a king surveying his kingdom, confident that no one could challenge him or take away what he'd built over years of manipulation and fear-mongering. But kings fall, and Bryce Carter was about to learn that lesson the hard way. Part 3. Maya's Secret Connection, a revelation that changes everything. What happens when the school bully picks on the wrong person? Someone with a connection so powerful it can turn the tables in ways no one could ever imagine? Bryce Carter, Clearview High's most feared student, thought he had found his next victim in Maya Williams, a quiet, reserved girl who seemed like an easy target. But what Bryce didn't know was that Maya had a secret. She wasn't just any ordinary student. She was Vin Diesel's adopted daughter, and that revelation would shake Bryce's confidence to its core. It all began with Bryce's relentless attempts to intimidate Maya. Day after day, he pushed her buttons, expecting her to crack under the pressure. But no matter what he did, whether it was mocking her in the hallways, spreading rumors, or embarrassing her in front of classmates, Maya remained calm. Her unyielding composure frustrated Bryce more than anything else. He couldn't understand why she wasn't reacting like everyone else did. Bryce thrived on fear and control. He was used to seeing people cower or lash out when he targeted them. But Maya was different. She didn't flinch, didn't argue, and didn't retaliate. Instead, she met his aggression with silence and patience, a strategy Bryce couldn't comprehend. What Bryce failed to realize was that Maya wasn't ignoring him out of weakness or fear. She was watching him carefully, calculating every move he made. She knew exactly what kind of person Bryce was, someone who relied on intimidation to maintain his status. And she also knew that power built on fear was fragile. Maya had dealt with bullies before, not just at school, but in life. And she had learned that the best way to defeat them wasn't through confrontation, but through patience and strategy. She let Bryce believe he was winning while quietly preparing herself for the moment when everything would change. That moment came one afternoon after school. Maya had just stepped outside, ready to head home, when Bryce appeared again, blocking her path with his usual smirk plastered across his face. Behind him stood a few of his friends, watching eagerly as if they were expecting another show. "You think you're tough, huh?" Bryce sneered, stepping closer to her. Maya didn't respond immediately. Instead, she stared at him calmly, her expression unreadable. "What's the matter?" Bryce continued, his voice dripping with mockery. "You think you're better than me?" Maya exhaled softly and then did something that caught Bryce completely off guard. She laughed. It wasn't a nervous laugh or a fearful one. It was genuine amusement. "I think," she said slowly, her voice steady and calm, "that you should walk away." Bryce's grin faltered for a brief moment before he recovered, stepping closer until he towered over her. "Oh yeah," he said smugly. "And why is that?" Maya leaned in slightly, her voice barely above a whisper as she replied, "Because you have no idea who I am." Bryce chuckled dismissively and shook his head. "And who exactly are you?" Maya didn't answer right away. Instead, she reached into her pocket and pressed a single button on her phone. A loud roar filled the air, the unmistakable sound of a powerful engine revving nearby. Moments later, a sleek black Dodge Charger Hellcat pulled up to the curb beside them. The car's presence alone was enough to turn heads. Its deep growl demanded attention. The tinted window rolled down slowly, revealing the driver, a tall, muscular man with an air of authority that couldn't be ignored. It was Vin Diesel. For the first time in his life, Bryce's confident smirk vanished entirely. His jaw tightened as his eyes flickered between Maya and the iconic figure sitting in the driver's seat of the Charger. The playful arrogance in his stance melted away, replaced by stiff uncertainty. The crowd that had gathered around them fell silent as they watched the scene unfold. Even Bryce's friends exchanged nervous glances behind him, unsure of what to do or say. Maya adjusted her backpack strap casually and turned back to Bryce with a small smile, the first genuine smile she'd shown all day. "Still think I'm weird?" she asked lightly. Bryce didn't answer because he couldn't. For once, he was the one feeling small. Vin Diesel didn't say much at first. He didn't need to. His presence alone sent a message louder than words ever could. He sat there calmly with one hand resting on the steering wheel, his gaze fixed on Bryce, a look so intense it made even the most confident person feel exposed. Bryce swallowed hard as if trying to convince himself this wasn't real, that it was some kind of mistake or joke. But deep down, he knew better. "Get in," Vin said finally, his voice calm but firm, a command rather than a suggestion. Maya didn't hesitate. She walked past Bryce without another word and climbed into the passenger seat of the Charger as if it were the most natural thing in the world. As Vin started the engine and pulled away from the curb, Maya glanced back at Bryce through the rearview mirror one last time. His posture remained stiff, his expression unreadable. But Maya knew what he was feeling, humiliation mixed with disbelief and fear. That evening at home, Maya recounted the events of the day to Vin over dinner. As she spoke about Bryce's behavior and how things had unfolded outside the school, Vin listened intently with a protective edge in his demeanor. "I can handle this," Vin said firmly when she finished recounting everything. "Just say the word, and I'll make sure that kid never bothers you again." But Maya shook her head resolutely. "No," she replied softly but confidently. "I need to handle this my way." Vin studied her for a moment before nodding in agreement, a gesture that spoke volumes about how much he respected her strength and resilience. "All right," he said finally. "But be careful. Boys like Bryce don't like to lose. They'll escalate things if they feel threatened." Maya knew he was right. She'd seen it before with bullies like Bryce who thrived on power and control. But she also knew something else. Power built on fear never lasts. If she could stay calm, if she could outlast him, Bryce would eventually unravel under his own arrogance. As Maya lay in bed that night staring at the ceiling above her, she began formulating a plan not to fight back directly, but to let Bryce destroy himself through his own actions. Maya's strategy, outwitting the bully. What do you do when someone tries to tear you down? Do you fight back with fire, or do you let them burn themselves out? Maya Williams knew the answer. She had faced bullies before, and she understood their game. Bryce Carter was no different. He thrived on intimidation, on forcing people to react, on feeding his ego with fear. But Maya wasn't like the others. She didn't fight back with aggression or anger. Instead, she chose a weapon far more powerful, her intelligence, her patience, and her unshakable composure. After Vin Diesel's unexpected appearance at school, Bryce was rattled. For the first time in his life, he felt small. But his bruised ego wouldn't let him back down. If anything, it made him more determined to prove he was still in control. Bryce doubled down on his efforts to humiliate Maya, convinced that if he pushed hard enough, she would crack. But Maya had a plan. She knew Bryce's type, arrogant, impulsive, and desperate for validation. People like him were their own worst enemies. They acted without thinking, driven by the need to maintain their dominance. All Maya had to do was wait for Bryce to make a mistake, and she knew it wouldn't take long. The next day at school, Bryce wasted no time trying to reassert his power. He spread rumors about Maya, telling anyone who would listen that she was stuck up and too good to talk to anyone. He made snide comments whenever she walked by, loud enough for others to hear, but subtle enough to avoid drawing attention from teachers. "Hey, new girl," he called out as Maya passed him in the hallway. "Still waiting for Daddy Diesel to come save you?" His friends laughed nervously, but Maya didn't even glance in his direction. She kept walking as if he didn't exist. Bryce's frustration grew with every encounter. No matter what he did, whether it was mocking her in class or accidentally bumping into her in the cafeteria, Maya refused to react. Her silence wasn't weakness, it was strength. And Bryce couldn't stand it. One afternoon during gym class, Bryce saw an opportunity to escalate things further. While the students were playing dodgeball, he deliberately aimed a throw at Maya's head, a move that was both reckless and cruel. The ball missed its target, but hit her shoulder hard enough to leave a mark. The coach blew his whistle and asked what happened, but Bryce shrugged innocently. "Sorry," he said with a smirk. "Didn't mean to throw it that hard." Maya didn't say a word. She simply picked up the ball and handed it back without looking at him. That moment should have been satisfying for Bryce. It should have been a victory, but instead, it left him feeling hollow. Her lack of reaction made him feel like he hadn't won anything at all. What Bryce didn't realize was that every move he made was being watched, not just by Maya, but by others around them. Students who had once laughed at his jokes or turned a blind eye to his behavior were starting to notice the pattern. They saw how relentless he was in targeting someone who refused to fight back. And slowly but surely, they began questioning whether Bryce Carter was really as untouchable as he seemed. Maya understood this shift better than anyone else. She knew that bullies like Bryce relied on their audience. Their power came from the people who enabled them by staying silent or laughing along with their cruelty. If she could change how people saw him, she could dismantle his power without ever raising her voice. Her opportunity came sooner than expected. One day after school, Maya overheard Bryce bragging loudly to his friends near the lockers about how easy it was to mess with her. "She doesn't even try to fight back," he said with a laugh. "It's pathetic." But what Bryce didn't know was that someone had recorded his comments, a fellow student who had grown tired of his antics and decided it was time for the school bully to face consequences. The next morning, printed screenshots of Bryce's cruel remarks were plastered across the lockers in the main hallway for everyone to see. Alongside them were photos of other incidents, moments where Bryce had targeted not just Maya, but other students as well. The reaction was immediate. Students stopped in their tracks as they read the evidence of Bryce's behavior. Whispers spread quickly through the crowd. Whispers of disbelief, anger, and even guilt from those who had once laughed along with him. Bryce arrived at school later than usual that day and froze when he saw the scene unfolding around him. His confident stride faltered as he realized what had happened. The smirk that usually adorned his face disappeared entirely. "Who did this?" he demanded angrily, but no one answered. For the first time in years, Bryce Carter wasn't the one holding all the power. Maya watched from a distance as everything unfolded exactly as she had anticipated. She didn't need to confront Bryce directly or retaliate with aggression. She simply let his own actions speak for themselves. By lunchtime, Bryce's reputation had taken a serious hit. Students who once admired him now avoided him altogether. His friends distanced themselves from him out of fear of being associated with his behavior. And through it all, Maya remained calm and composed. She knew this wasn't just about her. It was about sending a message that bullies like Bryce couldn't thrive forever. Their power wasn't invincible. It could be dismantled piece by piece if people stopped enabling them and started holding them accountable. As Maya walked through the hallways later that day, she felt lighter than she had in weeks. Not because she had defeated Bryce, but because she had proven something important. Strength doesn't come from fighting back. It comes from knowing when not to fight at all. Part 5. Vin Diesel's impactful appearance. The moment everything changed. What happens when the school's most feared bully realizes he's been messing with the wrong person? When the facade of power he's built for years crumbles in an instant. Bryce Carter, the self-proclaimed king of Clearview High, was about to learn a lesson he would never forget. And it all began with the unmistakable roar of an engine. Maya Williams had endured Bryce's relentless bullying for weeks. She had remained calm, patient, and composed, refusing to give him the reaction he so desperately sought. But Bryce wasn't someone who gave up easily. His ego wouldn't allow it. He continued to escalate his behavior, convinced that he could break her resolve. What he didn't know was that Maya had a secret, a connection so powerful it would shatter his confidence and expose just how fragile his reign truly was. It was a Friday afternoon, and the school day was winding down. Students were gathering their things, chatting excitedly about their weekend plans, and heading toward the parking lot or bus stop. Maya walked out of the building quietly, as she always did, blending into the crowd. She had perfected the art of going unnoticed. But Bryce had other plans. He was waiting for her near the front steps, leaning casually against a railing with his usual entourage by his side. His smirk was firmly in place, but there was an edge to it, a hint of frustration that had been building ever since Maya refused to play his game. "Hey, new girl," Bryce called out loudly, drawing the attention of nearby students. "Heading home already? What's the rush? Afraid I'll catch up." Maya stopped, but didn't turn around immediately. She could feel the weight of his words hanging in the air, the way they were meant to provoke her. Slowly, she turned to face him, her expression calm and unreadable. "What do you want, Bryce?" she asked evenly. Her lack of fear only fueled his determination to humiliate her further. He stepped closer, his voice dripping with mockery. "I just wanted to say hi," he said with a fake grin. "You know, make sure you're settling in okay. It must be hard being new here, not having any friends." His friends laughed on cue, their nervous chuckles echoing around them. But Maya didn't flinch. She simply stared at him, her gaze steady and unwavering. "Are you done?" she asked quietly. Bryce's smirk faltered for a split second before he recovered. He wasn't used to being challenged, especially not by someone like Maya. He opened his mouth to respond when it happened. The sound, a deep, guttural roar, cut through the air like thunder, silencing everyone in its path. Heads turned as students looked toward the source of the noise. A sleek black Dodge Charger Hellcat pulling into the school parking lot with an authority that couldn't be ignored. The car was a beast, its aggressive design and growling engine demanding attention from everyone who saw it. It rolled to a stop near the front steps, and for a moment, there was nothing but stunned silence. Then the driver's door opened. Out stepped Vin Diesel. The collective gasp from the crowd was almost audible as students stared in disbelief at the Hollywood icon standing before them. Dressed in a simple black t-shirt and jeans, Vin exuded an effortless confidence that made even Bryce Carter look small by comparison. Bryce froze. His usual cocky demeanor evaporated as he stared at Vin Diesel in shock. His friends exchanged nervous glances behind him, unsure of what to do or say. The power dynamic had shifted so suddenly and dramatically that none of them knew how to react. Vin didn't say anything at first. He didn't need to. His presence alone spoke volumes. He scanned the crowd briefly before his eyes landed on Maya. A small smile crossed his face as he gestured for her to come over. "Hey, kiddo," he said warmly as Maya approached him. "Hi," she replied with a smile of her own, one that seemed brighter than any she'd shown all week. Vin glanced at Bryce briefly before turning back to Maya. "You ready to go?" "Yeah," she said simply. As Maya climbed into the passenger seat of the Charger, Vin turned his attention back to Bryce one last time. His expression wasn't angry or threatening. It was calm but firm, like a silent warning that needed no words. Bryce couldn't hold his gaze for long. He looked away quickly, his confidence shattered under Vin's piercing stare. The Charger roared back to life as Vin started the engine and pulled out of the parking lot. Students watched in stunned silence as the car disappeared down the street, leaving behind an atmosphere thick with tension and disbelief. For Bryce Carter, this moment marked a turning point, a crack in the armor he had spent years building around himself. For so long, he had believed he was untouchable, that no one could challenge his authority or make him feel small. But in those few minutes outside Clearview High School, everything changed. The whispers started almost immediately after Vin left. "Did you see that? That was Vin Diesel. Maya knows him. Are they related?" Bryce looked terrified. Bryce tried to brush off their comments as he walked away from the scene, but it was clear that something had shifted. The students who once laughed at his jokes or followed his lead now looked at him differently, with curiosity instead of admiration and doubt instead of fear. Maya had said nothing during this entire exchange. She hadn't needed to, but her silence spoke louder than any words ever could. By simply existing as herself and refusing to engage with Bryce on his terms, she had turned his world upside down without lifting a finger. As for Maya, she felt lighter than she had in weeks as she rode home with Vin that afternoon. She knew this wasn't just about putting Bryce in his place. It was about reclaiming her own power and showing everyone at Clearview High that strength doesn't always come from fighting back directly. Sometimes it comes from knowing when to stand tall and let your presence speak for itself. Hey Viet Noi Dung Qua Fan 6 Voi Kaku Ka Sao. Viet Bang Tiang On. So Luong Tu Yu Ka La 1002. Fan Imo Dao Thursday Hut De Gay Tamacho Nuoine. Kanjia. Nu Doyo Hoa Kai. Du Tuoi 220 to 65 Tuoi. Chi Viet Fan Loi Doc. Kong Kan Ko and Hung Fan Kok Nu Goi Wai Chuyen Kan. And on. Emota Hin on Song Dong. Zedong Sung Da Man Mi. Nen Man Cam Suk Va Chao Treo. Gon Gukich Tin. Nip Du Ku Chuyen Tang Dan. Ket Hop Hin on Va Cam Suk. Kuchuyen Twen Tin. Jong Nu Mot Bo Phim Voi Chao Treo Lin Tuc. Noi Dong. 6 Bryce's downfall. Maya allows Bryce to continue his bullying until his own actions expose him. Evidence of his cruel comments and behavior is revealed publicly, causing him to lose his social standing and respect among peers. Maya's victory, the power of intelligence and patience. What does victory look like when you don't throw a single punch? When you don't shout, retaliate, or stoop to the level of those who try to tear you down? For Maya Williams, victory wasn't about overpowering Bryce Carter. It was about outsmarting him. And in the end, that's exactly what she did. By the time the dust settled, Bryce's reign over Clearview High had crumbled. The evidence of his cruelty, his mocking words, his relentless bullying, had been laid bare for everyone to see. His reputation, once built on fear and intimidation, was now in ruins. The students who once laughed at his jokes and followed his lead began to distance themselves from him. His friends, unwilling to be associated with his downfall, abandoned him one by one. Bryce was no longer the untouchable king of the school. He was just another student, stripped of the power he had wielded for so long. And Maya? She didn't gloat. She didn't rub her victory in his face or seek revenge for the weeks of torment she had endured. Instead, she carried herself with quiet dignity, knowing that her patience and resilience had paid off. She had proven that true strength doesn't come from aggression or brute force. It comes from knowing who you are and refusing to let anyone take that away from you. Maya's victory wasn't just about defeating Bryce. It was about changing the way people saw him and themselves. Her calm defiance had shown her classmates that they didn't have to accept bullying as a fact of life. They didn't have to laugh along or stay silent. They could choose to stand up, not with fists or anger, but with courage and integrity. In the days that followed, Maya began to feel a shift in how people treated her at school. Students who had once ignored her now smiled and said hello in passing. A few even apologized for not speaking up sooner when they saw what Bryce was doing. Maya accepted their apologies graciously, understanding that change takes time and courage. As for Bryce, he kept his head down, avoiding eye contact with anyone who might remind him of his fall from grace. He wasn't the same person he had been before, and maybe that was a good thing. Maybe losing his power would force him to reflect on who he really was and who he wanted to be. Maya walked through the halls of Clearview High with her head held high, not because she had defeated Bryce, but because she had stayed true to herself. She had faced adversity with grace and intelligence, proving that even in the face of cruelty, kindness and patience could prevail. Her story wasn't just a victory for her. It was a victory for everyone who had ever felt powerless in the face of a bully. And it was a reminder that sometimes the strongest thing you can do is simply refuse to give up and let your strength speak for itself.